This video is by Straight Goods News, SGNews.ca.
James Clancy, the National Union has released a new report called Unions Matter, and I think from my reading of it is at the core of it is this notion of equality and inequality. Why is your work being driven by equality and inequality?
Well, our union believes that income inequality is the #1 issue facing Canadians. Indeed, it's the #1 issue facing the world over the next foreseeable future. This growing gap between those that have and those that don't is injurious to not only individuals, obviously, but to communities and society as a whole. So this growing gap between those that have and those that don't, it's grown each and every year since 1980. Let's look at Canada. Since 1980, the income inequality gap has grown each and every year. Now, from 1945 to 1980, the gap closed each and every year. So let's think of it as a murder mystery, right? There's income inequality. It keeps rising each and every year. It's injurious. We know that it does damage to communities, to individuals. Why is that happening? Who did it? You know? So what we set out to do is answer that question. Who are the culprits? Who committed this? And there are 3 reasons. We think the first, our analysis tells us that, first of all, the attack on labor over the last 30 years has been absolutely relentless. In Canada, there's been 206 new pieces of labor legislation passed federally or provincially by governments across the country. Of the 206 pieces of legislation, 199 have restricted or eliminated the ability of working men and women to organize themselves into unions and to bargain collectively. So now social scientists can demonstrate to us, after 30 years of this trend, this attack on unions and rising income inequality, social scientists are now pointing out that about 20% of the rise in income inequality is directly attributable to the diminishment of unions, the attack on unions. So that's one reason why income inequality rises. The second reason in this country, talking about Canada for a minute, is we don't have a modern industrial strategy. This idea of just pulling resources out of the ground or off the hillsides and shipping it overseas unprocessed and not creating good jobs here in Canada, doing some primary manufacturing or work with the product, the resources, is absolutely absurd. What it has meant is that increasingly in Canada, what we have is what I call a McJob economy. Increasingly, people are scrambling to put 2 or 3 jobs together, low-paying jobs, just to make ends meet. So, again, to answer this question, who did it? Why is this income inequality rising? The second culprit is that we have governments that have failed to provide and to build what I call a modern industrial strategy, a strategy that has at its core, the core of the strategy is people and nature. So we need to get working on that if we're going to reduce income inequality. And then the third reason why income inequality continues to rise in this country is that we have no tax fairness. We have no tax fairness anymore in this country. The progress, the tax system was a much more progressive system. If we take the period 1945 to 1980, just to take that period, where income inequality was declining, was closing off, we had a tax system that was much more progressive. Today, we've got some people that are paying, dare I say it, too much taxes, because there are some people living in the big house at the top of the hill that aren't paying any. Or there are corporations that we keep spending our tax monies. Our taxes that we collect, it's our commonwealth. We're using our commonwealth, our taxes, for the common good. That's the purpose of a progressive tax system. But increasingly, we've got some people in corporations where we're taking the scarce resources, these scarce tax monies, and we're spending these tax monies on tax breaks for the wealthiest and for corporations that are doing fabulously well. So when you do that, what follows? When you don't have a fair tax system, what happens is public services get squeezed, cut, chopped, eliminated, privatized. And that's important to watch, because as you attack public services, I mean, public services are what give people a shot at life. It creates the conditions so that people have a shot at life. So when you attack public services, there's a direct relationship between the attack on public services and rising income inequality. So again, to answer, if we looked at it as a whodunit, a murder mystery, income inequality, it's on the floor, here it is, who did it, it's rising. 3 reasons: the attack on labor rights, no modern industrial strategy, and the 3rd reason is no tax fairness. So we're working on our membership. We're running campaigns, working with our members. We're all together now, campaign as one member, talking to another member, talking to another member about this analysis that I've just shared. So one of the groups that we're working with is a group called Canadians, the Canadian Foundation for Labor Rights. So we've got citizens, academics, legal practitioners, some trade unionists. It's a group that we're a member of. And they held a conference last week in Toronto, an international conference on labor rights. Again, we're trying to get at this question, we're trying to get a broader understanding of why unions matter. I mean, unions brought us the 40-hour work week and the 8-hour day and so on and so forth. But that's a rather narrow description of what unions do in a modern democracy. And so this conference was trying to explore that idea of, looking at the assault on unions over the last 30 years, the 199 pieces of legislation that have been passed that are really restricting working women and men's ability to organize and to bargain. But we are also looking at the question of what role do unions play in society today? In a modern democratic state or society, what role do unions play? And so the conference began with a presentation by Richard Wilkinson, who authored the book The Spirit Level, which looks at this question of income inequality and why is it important, and why does it matter to communities and to provinces and indeed to the country? Why should we be concerned about rising income inequality? So Wilkinson led off the conference, and then a number of speakers talked about the role that unions play. And to put it simply, to state it rather simply, unions have a role to play and play a role in society that's more than just simply bargaining wages for the members they represent. Unions play a much larger role. Essentially, why do unions matter? Well, unions are essentially about fairness.
You've been saying a lot of these things for most of your career as a union activist. What was new in the report? What surprised you here?
In the report, a couple of things. First of all, I don't think people appreciate that between elections, unions play an important they act as a counterweight, if I could put it that way, to the tremendous influence and the rise in influence and power that the corporate world has over public policy formulation. Now, we often talk about the role that corporations play when it comes to elections themselves. That's well documented here in the States and so on and elsewhere. But what the report really flagged for us was the incredible power and authority that corporations, particularly over the last 30 years, the rise in authority and influence that they have in terms of shaping public policy between elections, not at the ballot box, but in terms of the policies that governments bring into play. And that the attack on unions means that one of the real counterweights to that influence and that authority is being diminished, is being lost as unions are being attacked. So unions play an important role as a counterweight, as part of a democratic state, a democratic society. They act as an important counterweight to the influence the corporate world has over public policy. So that was interesting. Another point that emerged through the studies and the paper was that unions play an important role in ensuring that there's fairness of opportunity for people in our communities, in our society. That is to say that unions are able to ensure that a host of groups who have concerns or issues that they want raised in the public arena, unions have been instrumental in ensuring that they've got the support and in some cases the resources to make sure their voice is heard. So that was another, I think, important part of the narrative of why unions matter.
It's interesting to be having this conversation on the day after Maggie Thatcher died, because of course she ushered in so many of the changes that you're talking about. Could you talk a bit about what Thatcher represented and her significance in this story?
Well, Thatcher and Reagan and, you know, the late 80s, you know, Thatcher took office in 79, Reagan in 1980. I think for a lot of our membership and Canadians that are younger, they perhaps don't appreciate that. Again, I go back from 1945 to 1980, income inequality was narrowing. If we look at 1980 as sort of that sort of watershed period, income inequality rises. It coincided with the policies that were ushered in by Thatcher, Reagan, and people of that persuasion, if I could put it that way. This idea that somehow if the markets are unfettered, you know, if somehow we reduce regulation, get government off the backs of business, that somehow this economy was going to flourish, and that all the benefits would trickle down and everybody, you know, all boats would rise. Well, we can say with certainty in the year 2013 that that was absolute nonsense, that all of the nostrums, all of their, you know, their predictions about what would happen, they didn't come true. What we've got is greater income inequality. We've got people scrambling, looking for piecing 2 or 3 jobs together. You know, people are carrying much more personal debt in order to maintain themselves. So all of the policies and the philosophy, you know, the ideology that they were promoting. You know, when I think of Thatcher, I think of somebody that said, you know, her notion was that there's no such thing as society, that there's simply individuals, and that, you know, it's every man, every person for themselves sort of thing. I don't think you can build and sustain an economy. I don't think you can build a healthy community. I don't think you can build a healthy province or indeed a country that way.
And we've seen the outcomes from that over the last several decades. Where do you go with what you've learned from this report? Where's your union going to go?
I think
Where would other
that the trade union movement has to really redouble its efforts and really create a new narrative about who they are, why it's important, why it plays an important role in a democratic society. And I think it starts with the word fairness. You know, what are unions about? Unions are about fairness. I don't know anybody that I've worked with, a member, an activist, leadership in my 25 years. Why did we go to work? Why do we come into, what are we about? It's always about fairness. It's fairness of opportunity, right? It's fairness, you know, it's fighting for democracy. It's fighting for people to have a voice, to have a say. It's fighting to ensure that workplaces are safe. It's fighting to ensure that public policy represents, it's a reflection of what everybody needs and everybody wants. It's fighting for the least, the least advantaged in our communities, on our work sites. So I think the narrative has to be, starts with the word fairness. That's what unions are about. And then I think we have to go out and assert that in a way that we haven't done in years. You know, then the narrative over the last 30 years, beginning with Reagan attacking the air traffic controllers, Thatcher the miners, and we could go on and on. I mean, they captured the narrative. Their argument was that unions stood in the way of progress, that if you removed the regulations governing business, more freedom for business, more freedom for the corporate world, more freedom for the financial world, and you eliminated those nasty, pesky unions, that, you know, we would all boats would rise. And I'm saying after 30 years, that's absolute nonsense. It hasn't panned out. So what I'm suggesting is we don't have to create this, it's not like we have to go and create new reasons why unions should exist. The reasons are there. So the narrative has to talk about fairness. It has to be predicated on values. What are the values that we as unionists bring to our work and bring to the public policy debates every day? It's about sharing. It's about caring. It's about empathy. It's about ensuring that nobody's left behind. So it begins with the narrative, reframing the narrative, asserting the narrative, and it continues from there. On this question, I don't think there can be any bystanders. I think we're reaching a point here in this country as we witness the tremendous push for American-style labor laws here in Canada, right? I think we're at a really sort of watershed moment. And I think that unionists themselves have to stand up and assert why unions are important, why they should exist, why they play an important role in the democratic state. But I also think that we have to call on all Canadians to take a stand on this. Whose side are you on? Whose side are you on? There can't be any bystanders on this one. So whether there are many people out there that don't belong to unions, there are many people out there that, but they understand the values that are behind what we're trying to do each and every day. So I think we have to call on them to step up, to stand forward, and they've got to take a position on this. Look, in the last 30 years, the right has made, this notion of fairness has been, is really has been turned into a vice, and greed has been made into a virtue. It's like Alice in Wonderland. Up is down, down is up. It's crazy. So I think we have to reassert our values, reassert what we're about, and we have to do that in a very demonstrable fashion. But we also have to call on others to join with us, others who aren't unionists, who understand, though, that the values that we're trying to promote, the values that we're fighting for, are values that serve them well.
And that's the gist of this report, then.
Fundamentally, that's the report. Bolsters. Gives us the argumentation. It backs up the argumentation with work by social scientists, academics. A number of people who are now, turning their attention to this question, and who are demonstrating that unions have an important role in terms of economic justice, not simply for their own members, but for others in the community. But also the report talks about the role that unions play in ensuring that we have democracy itself in our country.